What the heck is unschooling? I'll admit, the word unschooling has almost as much negative baggage as the word homeschooling. The first time I heard the term unschooling was at a Valley Venture Mentors event in Springfield, Massachusetts, where I was giving a short presentation about Open Source High. After all the entrepreneurs gave their pitches, we split up into small groups where people attending the event could give us feedback and discuss our ideas. I remember someone who came to my group telling me, "It sounds like what you're describing is unschooling." I reactively dismissed the possibility that my project could ever be affiliated with such a silly word. The term unschooling continued to pop up on my radar, but diving deeper into researching the subject sat toward the bottom of my never-ending to-do list. It was only after I stepped away from Open Source High in early 2016 that I finally had the time to explore new ideas and learn about subjects such as unschooling. I first started reading about unschooling on blogs and different websites. It appeared that young unschoolers were learning and thriving by simply following their interests without any curriculum or grades or force or coercion. As unschooling mother Carrie McDonald writes in her book, Unschooled, Raising Curious, Well-Educated Children Outside the Conventional Classroom. Curriculum rests on control. It is about deciding what subject matter others should study and master, and when. It may be a gentle curriculum with songs and games and colorful stickers, but it is still a method of controlling another's learning, sometimes through prodding, bribery, and punishment. Unschooling is about challenging that control. Without a curriculum, learning becomes less regimented and more organic, springing from developing interests and passions. There is no need to prod, bribe, or punish a child because learning comes from within. Instead of someone else deciding what a learner should know or do, it is the learner who decides what to know and do. Instead of someone else assessing a learner's knowledge, it is the learner who decides when her learning is complete. Unschooling is far less authoritarian than schooling. Learning happens naturally and much more meaningfully when it is driven by the learner's personal motivations. Reference 53. If you are looking for a simple definition of what exactly unschooling is, the simplest thing I can say is that it is living life as if school does not exist. Unschooling is essentially a slang word for self-directed learning. If you are looking for a more formal definition, Wikipedia defines unschooling as an educational method and philosophy that advocates learner-chosen activities as a primary means for learning. Reference 54. The term unschooling was first coined in the 1970s by John Holt, who became disillusioned with the school system after teaching elementary school for 6 years and began writing about self-directed learning and unschooling. Reference 55. Holt believed that children who were provided with a rich and stimulating learning environment would learn what they are ready to learn when they are ready to learn it. Reference 56. Holt's philosophy was that children did not need to be coerced into learning. They would do so naturally if given the freedom to follow their own interests and a rich assortment of resources. Reference 57. His book, Teach Your Own, and popular magazine, Growing Without Schooling, became the handbook and information source that empowered many parents in the pre-internet days to remove their children from the school system to pursue self-directed learning. It's important to acknowledge that this countercultural unschooling movement is often affiliated with white, upper-middle-class people. To put it directly, as unschooling mother Tiffany Sandoval wrote in a blog post titled, "Diversity, Let's Begin the Conversation." She wrote, "Let's just be real for a minute. The homeschooling and unschooling community is lacking cultural and socioeconomic diversity." Reference 58. Despite this notable problem with the movement at large, the truth is that self-directed learning has been a critical part of the cultures of Black, Indigenous, and people of color for many years. In her controversial article in Tipping Points, titled Ours First, Associate Professor of Education Dr. Kelly Limes Taylor Henderson writes, "Centering whiteness and wealth is common practice in the settler colonial imperialist context that is the United States. That assumption more accurately reflects the normalized and dominant identities of a Western-dominated global system, rather than the groups that historically practiced self-directed education, whether voluntarily or involuntarily. Marginalized groups have been learning the world for a long time and without school. Before and throughout this colonialist era, it is the way we learn to manage our food systems and organize communities. It is the way we learn to predict weather and navigate seas. It is the way we learn transportation routes and our stories. It is the way we learned ourselves and others. It is the way we learned who the oppressors really were, despite what they told us about themselves and their schools. It is the way we learned to survive under Western colonialism and imperialism. And it is the way we will thrive beyond it. Reference 59. In looking at the data from the National Center for Education Statistics, white families choose homeschooling at a rate approximately twice that of Black, Indigenous families of color. Reference 60. The data also supports that homeschooling is not only for upper-middle-class families, with homeschooling rates approximately equal for families above and below the poverty line. Reference 61. To be clear, this data is for all homeschoolers, not just unschoolers. In most cases, the decision for parents to unschool their children does bring with it some financial setbacks, but these parents feel that the educational value of unschooling is worth the cost. Unschooling father Ben Hewitt published an article about his family's decision to unschool as a lower-class family. Everyone we know who unschools, in fact, has chosen autonomy over affluence. Hell, some years we're barely above the poverty line. But the truth is, unschooling isn't merely an educational choice, it's a lifestyle choice. Reference 62. While we're talking about the accessibility of unschooling, it's important to note that unschooling is the choice for children with a wide range of disabilities. Unschooling researcher Dr. Gina Riley is currently involved in a study to explore this group and shared with me an update of her findings thus far. I'm currently doing a study on those who unschool students with disabilities and special needs, and for my research, this population is larger than we can imagine. First of all, disability tends to be a social construct, and most disability is classified and diagnosed within the time that a child is enrolled in school. There are many parents that choose to homeschool and unschool from the beginning, knowing that their child is different, and knowing that difference may be labeled or defined within a traditional school environment. I'm hearing so many stories of individuals who unschool whose children have a wide range of disabilities, like ADHD, LD, ID, autism, EBD, etc. We always hear that students with disabilities need structure, but you can unschool and still provide a structured environment for your child. Reference 63. According to the National Center for Educational Statistics, approximately 5% of parents stated that the most important reason they chose homeschooling was because their child has a physical or mental health problem. Reference 64. The unschooling movement has continuously grown since the 1970s, with current estimates stating that approximately 10% of the 2 million homeschoolers in the United States would be classified as unschoolers. Reference 65. Learning that people were unschooling since the 1970s and that there was a whole movement behind this learning approach was a huge awakening for me. I realized that I didn't need to invent the solution that allowed young people to thrive without school. It already existed. My focus quickly shifted away from creating a solution and toward learning about what already existed and finding a way to make it affordable and accessible to everyone. This put me in a similar situation as when starting my LED company, American Relight. We didn't need to invent anything. We needed to make the technology accessible and affordable to everyone by using marketing and education to spread the word and a financial mechanism to make it affordable. I realized something similar was needed for the unschooling movement. In the same way that I needed to learn a lot about LED technology before I could promote it, I had a lot to learn from existing unschoolers who had been using this approach to learning for decades. To understand this way of life, reading blogs and books wasn't enough. I needed to meet some actual unschoolers in person. In September 2016, I attended my first of many unschooling conferences, called the Life Without Instructions Conference in Staten Island, New York. While I tend to feel like a bit of an outsider anywhere I go, I never felt more welcome around a group of people than I did at Life Without Instructions. Being at an event surrounded by self-directed learners finally made this lifestyle feel normal, whereas previously it always felt so foreign and unusual. The families of unschoolers at the conference were an interesting paradox. On the one hand, I could describe them as a group of like-minded people because of their choices related to pursuing self-directed education. On the other hand, the very thing they all had in common was an open-mindedness and a different way of living their lives than the mainstream world did. I couldn't really put anyone in a box and say, this is what an unschooler looks like. True, there were more people with colored hair, tattoos, and casual clothing than you'd see at a more conventional education conference. But there were just as many people with conventional appearances. Appearances were not a unifying characteristic of unschoolers. What connected them was their curiosity and interest in learning, and they all carried out discussions and participated in workshops collaboratively. The families came in all shapes, sizes, colors, and economics. Black, white, brown, single parents and married parents, large families and small families, rich families and poor families. Not every family was a 100% unschooling family. Some families with multiple children had kids in conventional school, and some who were unschooled. It was a blend without any specific rules. The interests of the unschoolers were also across the board, but the one thing they had in common was that they were interested in learning. One teen I met was into military history, another into health and nutrition, while another was very into music and played multiple instruments and was in several bands. One was a competitive figure skater who simply couldn't attend school and pursue their interest at the same time. Another was an active Dungeons & Dragons player who was interested in creating his own board games. A surprising number of teens attending the event were world travelers who learned by traveling the world and refer to themselves not as unschoolers, but as world schoolers. Having met many more unschoolers since this conference, I find that the ones you typically hear about or read about are the exceptions. The geniuses who are amazing at a musical instrument or who know how to play 30 different musical instruments, or the pro athletes or pop music stars or actresses. Sure, these people do exist, but most unschoolers are more like run-of-the-mill people. They're human, just like you. You may be wondering what their social skills were like. Contrary to the negative stereotypes about homeschoolers, the young unschoolers at the conference had great social skills. In fact, on average, I would say their social skills were above the level of their peers. The idea that homeschooling will lead to poor social skills appears to be a myth. Homeschooling father Michael Renier has even written that I would go so far as to say that we homeschool because it's so good at socialization. Reference 66. Unschoolers' excellent social skills are a result of age mixing. Unschoolers are not separated out by age like in schools. They are free to spend time with people of any age. As Peter Gray wrote in an article for Education Week, if we want to capitalize on children's and adolescents' natural, playful ways of learning, we must find ways to break down the barriers we have erected to keep young people of different ages apart. Age segregation deprives them not only of fun, but also of the opportunity to use fully their most powerful natural tools for learning. Reference 67. The unschoolers' social skills also seemed above average because the youth were entirely comfortable speaking to adults. This makes sense because all the adults that schooled students are around, namely parents and teachers, tend to play the role of authority figures. In the case of unschoolers, it was more common that they would build friendships with adults without a power hierarchy. Speaking of the adults, another remarkable observation was the strong relationships that existed between the teens and their parents. I was surprised to see such openness, honesty, trust, and respect both from the parents toward their teens as well as the teens toward their parents. I remember attending a group session specifically for parents of teen unschoolers, where one parent remarked, "Everyone warned us that when our kids became teens, they turn into rebellious monsters. But it never happened. They have nothing to rebel against." It wasn't just the youth who were curious, interested, motivated learners. The parents subscribed to the same philosophy on life. I came to learn that while unschooling is usually thought of specifically as an approach to education, in practice, many parents extend non-authoritarian unschooling philosophies to their entire parenting style. Teresa Graham Brett writes about how school interferes with the parent-child relationship and the impact it has on their learning. Schools use their control over children to drive performance. As babies and children grow up within our paradigm that embraces power and control over others, we learn that we must please our parents in order to maintain their love and acceptance. Teachers soon take over the role of authoritative parents, and the majority of students, who are not motivated by an intrinsic desire to learn whatever material the curriculum requires of them at the time, learn to perform to please their teachers and parents in order to get some emotional needs met. Reference 68. I highly recommend attending a conference for unschoolers to meet teen unschoolers and learn directly from them what this lifestyle is like. There are annual conferences that take place all over the United States and some internationally. Sue Patterson's website, unschoolingmomtomom.com, has a page dedicated to finding unschooling conferences in your area. Reference 69. You can also connect online with some unschooling teens on the Peer Unschooling Network, reference 70, and to unschooling parents in a variety of Facebook groups, reference 71. Other opportunities to meet in person with other unschoolers include programs like Not Back to School Camp, which is a summer camp specifically for teen unschoolers. I worked at Not Back to School Camp for one 10-day summer session and cannot recommend it enough. If traveling is an interest of yours, there are two programs which both offer international travel experiences with other unschoolers and world schoolers called Unschool Adventures and Project World School. Project World School also offers 2 family summits per year that your entire family can attend, which function similarly to an unschooling conference. I've been the MC at 2 of these events in Mexico and had a great time connecting with such interesting families from around the world. When approaching unschoolers as a curious outsider, be aware that while unschoolers are often the most open-minded and accepting people I've ever met, occasionally they can be a little suspicious of outsiders probing them with lots of questions. You have to keep in mind that unschoolers are sometimes judged for living life differently. Parents expressed to me that they were often criticized by their friends and family for choosing to unschool their children. It's unfortunate that most of society has been socialized into believing that education can only happen within a school, despite the fact that public opinion is that our education system is failing our kids. Reference 72. The day-to-day lives of unschoolers are hard to describe because it will vary depending on the individual's interests. That is the nature of personalized learning. There is no one-size-fits-all box. Ideas and interests flow naturally throughout a day, week, year, or decade. It's completely natural. For example, creating art can be a fun gateway to developing a variety of skills and interests. An unschooler learning to paint may become curious about how the paints are created, which can lead to an interest in chemistry. This can lead to an unschooler creating their own home science lab where they experiment with creating and mixing their own pigments and paints. The bridge between art and engineering was made elegantly by Renaissance artists like Leonardo da Vinci, but also applies to modern times as well. For example, when my friend Brianna was a teen, she started a creative project to build a custom bookshelf for her brother's bedroom. This evolved into her designing and manufacturing a unique spiral-shaped bookshelf out of sheet metal. Through this project, she ultimately learned a lot about sheet metal fabrication and even started a business selling her bookshelves online. Today, she works in industry as a structural engineer. One clever tactic that unschoolers use for learning new skills is to gain on-the-job work experience by getting apprenticeships, internships, and volunteering. Many think this is something that only college students do, but these opportunities are actually available to people of all ages. All you have to do is ask. I actually had an unschooler approach me a couple years ago to see if she could be an apprentice in web development as a means of improving her coding skills. I told her I didn't have the time to coach her, but I could give her some small tasks and see how she did, and if it went well, I would pay her. It turns out she was far more talented than she suggested during our conversation, and she has been working for me for the last 2 years. She went from offering to work for free as an apprentice to having a job, just by asking. I've heard many stories of young unschoolers who got their first jobs by starting as a volunteer and slowly making themselves invaluable to a company and ultimately asking for a paying job. Play is another underrated way unschoolers learn, whether it is board games, card games, role-playing games, or video games. Parents often overlook this fact and often try to organize games themselves and force learning into the games. It's important that the activities actually be directed by young people. As Peter Gray shared in an interview with the American Journal of Play, I think activities structured for kids by adults are not fully play. Reference 73. While the term unschooling might suggest a rejection of every learning method found in schools, that is not the case. For example, many unschoolers take classes to learn certain unique subjects that require more direct coaching, like karate or calligraphy. It's very common for unschoolers to begin taking classes at their local community colleges as teenagers, because they are allowed to take individual classes they are interested in without needing to enroll as full-time students. Taking community college classes is also a cost-effective way to start accumulating college credits. Some unschoolers even find themselves transferring to private universities as sophomores at age 18 when their schooled peers are graduating high school and applying to college to be freshmen. Unschooling also doesn't mean you can't use textbooks. Some unschoolers read textbooks when they want a really comprehensive view of an entire subject. The key is that unschoolers are not limited only to classrooms and textbooks. The goal is to pursue learning in whatever manner you wish. Unschooling is not a mechanism to reduce your opportunities, but rather to expand them. If you are looking for a subject-by-subject breakdown of how every subject can be learned without school, I highly recommend Grace Llewellyn's book, The Teenage Liberation Handbook, reference 74. Grace's book has become the ultimate handbook for teens interested in unschooling and will go much more in-depth than this overview. What's most fascinating about her book is that it was published before the internet became ubiquitous, so there are countless real-world approaches to learning. You're not only restricted to the digital realm. While the internet is an amazing tool, you should also aim to have real-life interactive experiences which you can learn from. While this can mean doing hands-on projects, internships, and volunteering, I'd also like to mention the role that travel has played in a lot of unschoolers' lives. In fact, travel has become the focal point of some families' learning who refer to themselves as world schoolers. World schooling is a small but growing lifestyle of traveling the world and learning through cultural immersion in different countries. Some would imagine this to only be the lifestyles of the rich and famous, but it's quite the contrary. Many world schoolers are not wealthy. They've merely prioritized travel and learning above material possessions and have found creative ways to make things work. For example, some use the website trustedhousesitters.com to get basically free housing in different countries. I'm a big advocate for the benefits that are gained from travel and highly recommend it. As I shared with you earlier, my goal in being involved in education is to transform our culture to be more loving, accepting, creative, and collaborative. Travel is an excellent gateway for embracing these values. As Mark Twain said, "Travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness, and many of our people need it sorely on these accounts. Broad, wholesome, charitable views of men and things cannot be acquired by vegetating in one little corner of the earth all of one's lifetime." Reference 75. As you can tell, unschooling looks different to different people. If you're trying to imagine what your life would be like without school, I suggest that you take a look at your life when school isn't in session. What do your weekends, summers, and school vacations look like? What would you do if summer vacation ran all year round? It's possible that this may all feel either too good to be true or like something that other families do. Or maybe your mind is overwhelmed with all the possibilities of having that much freedom. You may be thinking, this just isn't what my life could be. I think that all those feelings are a natural reaction to learning about a lifestyle that seems so foreign to your own, especially once you realize that unschooling isn't some strange cultural practice happening in a faraway land, People are unschooling right in your state. This life has been accessible to you your whole life. You just didn't know it existed. There's a possibility that you may even feel a bit of anger, born out of frustration that some teens have so much freedom compared to you. That is a natural feeling as well. It does seem unfair, doesn't it?